do our every Wednesday ritual. Leave, find your device, turn it off, which I am doing. All choose out the value of hoping everybody is in. Today, announcements.
Yeah, one quick announcement. We created a team for Sonoma Serves, which is on October 1st. And what Sonoma Serves is this 2-day service on campus. There's usually about 1,000 to 1,500 students that participate. You need an FYE team, and your peer mentors will be sending out the links for that. It counts as an FYE event. And basically, you get up, and everybody meets at the rec center. We don't find out where we're going until the morning of Saturday, October 1st. I think we have to meet at 8 or 8:30, so it's a little bit early. It's a really fun event. It's a good way to get to know other people in FYE and your classes.
And a great way to get into the service community, if you say, if that's something that interests you. And I think for many of you it probably will, and you should. So today we are doing kind of our...
No, I lied. It's September 13th. Tuesday we have Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which is our first movie after Cooperage on Tuesday.
Anybody remember? Yes? 5, thank you.
Thank you. 5 o'clock at the Cooperage, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Also California.
Yes, that's next Tuesday, 5 o'clock in the Cooperage. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Politically themed, we're going to do a lot of politically themed things this year, and a momentous election year. Today we are really kicking off the, unit, main, not that anything that's come before hasn't been main or important, but really we're kicking off the primary conversation that we'll be having over the course of this term, which is about human identity and your identity, how identity gets made, created, both individual and global, and cultural, and all that sort of thing, the various mechanisms by which it becomes made, and we're going to make the point today that this place, the academy, the university, is a place that is almost obsessively interested in those identity questions. What does it mean to be a human being? A particular human being in a particular time and place, generalized human being as a human being, both whether biologically or psychologically or sociologically or whatever. Every discipline you will find as you go through your studies is interested in this topic. Today we have presentations from 4 wonderful people. Dr. Tom Shaw from Global Studies and Hutchins, and Acost from Communications, Bob Switky from Political Science, and WAP. And we are all going to sort of speak from the point of view of our areas of study, about our own engagement with the question of identity through the lens of what we look at and study and teach in our courses. It might serve as a kind of a forecast for what you might see in your, as you go through your general education and all that. It might even give you some clues about what's a major. Take it away, Tom.
Is this working? Is there a mic on? So an additional objective of FYE, and I guess I know from my own background because I helped design FYE many years ago, is to expose you to multiple disciplines across the academic world. And so we had originally thought we'd get everybody together who at least represented a few disciplines and speak about the discipline a little bit and give you an idea of what identity, how it's handled from different disciplines. So that's kind of what I want to do. I don't know if we're all going to do that, but I think it's important for you to understand that identity looked at through different lenses looks quite different, the different lenses being the different disciplines. My discipline, what I was trained in, was anthropology. Do you know what anthropologists study? No? Humans. Exactly. Humans. And it's been said that Albert Einstein was probably one of the most boring people in the world because he was only interested in one thing, the universe. And anthropologists are the same thing. We're only interested in one thing, humans. So we have something in common. So identity from the point of view of anthropology, first point I want to make is that your identity is an argument. That's another objective of FYE, if you hadn't already figured that out, is to get you to become critical thinkers. So identity could be looked at as an argument. It's an argument about who you are. So what does your identity communicate about you? And how do you use your identity to communicate who you are? Do you communicate that you're a needy person? Do you communicate that you're an independent flyer? Do you communicate that you're wild and crazy? I mean, your behavior, certainly, your clothing, perhaps, your speech, all communicate messages about who you are. What messages are you sending? That you're casual, a casual person, a formal person, a funny person, a stiff person? What does your identity communicate, and how does it communicate who you are? Can you imagine what it would be like to have hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people in the audience for your identity display? Wouldn't that be exciting? Well, you do. Your audience is society itself. This is where the discipline comes in, anthropology, and its very close cousin, sociology. There's a generalized other for all of us, and that generalized other for all of us is society. We're all putting on our displays of identity for society, and society is telling us what roles we need to play, what messages we need to communicate. So identity is an argument for which the generalized audience is society itself, all 300 million of us. But you don't know they're really looking. It's internalized in many ways. Society as your audience is internalized. Probably the sociologist most well known for this point of view is named Irving Goffman, Irving with an E, Goffman. And he wrote a book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Life is a stage, and identity is performed in this view of identity. Even things like he wrote about being sick, how it's a performance. Sick people have what we all understand to be infections and disease, but they also have a role to play. And we know a sick person is sick by their performance. They act out the role of identity. There's two really interesting examples from the literature that I read getting my training as an anthropologist. There were way more than two, but there's two I'll mention today. One was this crazy little book called Jocks and Burnouts. Anybody ever read that? Jocks and Burnouts was an attempt to classify the cliques, the small groups, in a high school in Detroit. And Jocks and Burnouts really understates the complexity of those cliques, doesn't it? But in that day, it was many years ago, decades I think now, and Jocks and Burnouts were the two main cliques. And jocks, as you can probably imagine, were those who embraced school, embraced learning, showed up for every assignment, showed up for every extracurricular activity. You know, they were in the sports, they were in politics, they were just totally embraced school. And then the burnouts were just the opposite. The burnouts rejected school, and the author Penelope Eckert writes that they didn't even put locks on their lockers. And they always wore coats. It was kind of, this captured my attention. They wore coats because, and her claim was, they wore jackets even during class and in the hallways because, after all, they were just passing through school. They weren't taking it seriously at all. It was just a way station that they had to go through, and it was temporary. So they weren't really on a success track. They were not going to achieve much, at least not through school. And they somehow already knew that. And a question I'm going to leave you with, not at this exact moment, but the question I want you thinking about is that a conscious role? Is that a conscious identity? They come from families where they know that success isn't likely, a lot of these burnout kids, and they act out that internalized sense of self. Another example comes from a dissertation by a friend of mine who I haven't spoken to him in years, but he's now a professor of education at Stanford, and he wrote his dissertation. He recorded 30 minutes of a classroom, I think it was like sixth grade, a sixth grade classroom, reading groups. And the teachers got the different reading groups around 4 or 5 different tables, and the kids do the reading, and then she asked for questions. He videotaped this. So he videotaped it and then analyzed it for his dissertation. So the teacher, after the reading, goes, does anybody have a question about so-and-so and so, or a point they want to make, or what did you think of this character, that character? And there were several people raise their hand, and she had a little interaction, a Socratic dialogue with them about what they observed. And then she said, okay, you guys have done quite well. Is there anybody else who got some interesting sense of what's going on in this book? And she waits and pauses for a second. And she goes, okay then. And she turns away and she starts to do something else, turns her back, and 2 kids raise their hand immediately as soon as she turns her back. And in his dissertation, his argument is they have become really successful at failing. They know just how to fail. They raise their hands when they know the teacher can't possibly call on them because she isn't looking. And so they've internalized, you see, this identity, according to the theory, of failure, and they act it out really well. They may not be conscious of it. In fact, what's the likelihood that they're conscious of that? Probably almost 0. But it's an internalized identity coming from society. So when society shapes your identity, it does in a way that it's often internalized, it's not necessarily conscious, but we nonetheless act it out as if it were a conscious psychological construct in our minds. For some people, it may be more conscious than others. Some identities, even though they're society-driven, might be more conscious than others. How about gender, for example, is maybe more conscious. How about, I don't know, guys at the gym, working out? Are they consciously building their muscles as well as their identity? Maybe. Maybe it's more conscious. But gender, oftentimes, you don't even know that you're playing the part, that you're fulfilling the social script, because it's not a written script. It's not a written script at all, and you've internalized it. A lot of status, a lot of identity associated with social status isn't conscious at all, but it's there for others to see. And as an anthropologist, that's kind of the thing that I was expected to look at and observe, is to see how people enacted these unconscious social statuses and what it said about them. So I'm ready for the questions I have for you to think about in your seminar. Do you have an identity that you perform on a regular basis that is probably not conscious? That's unconscious. You realize that by thinking about it, you're making it conscious, which is a good thing. And do you have an identity, maybe like gym workouts? I don't know if that's a valid example. Do you have an identity that you perform on a regular basis that you are more or less conscious of? So those are questions to bring to your seminar, and that's a lot of how anthropologists and sociologists look at identity. Very different from, attachment theory and deep psychological psychoanalysis, right? If any of you have been through that. So thank you.
Transition.
Awkward transition.
On.
Just hold this. If you had your phones, you could take a picture. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach and talk about how my discipline is tied to who I am in my identity. As I have a phone out, funny, my notes are on my phone. But I teach in media and communications, and I had no idea what I wanted to do when I went to college. I picked San Diego State because it was big and on the opposite side of the country from home, and went in undeclared and had no idea what I wanted to do. And sometime in my first year, I took my first Intro to Mass Communications course. And that completely changed the trajectory of my life. Like, I can't imagine if I didn't take that class where I'd be today. The first thing that really resonated with me in that class was the idea that the media can shape our ideals and our perceptions of ourselves and our perceptions of reality. I never really thought about that until then. I'd never taken a comms course or a media class or anything like that. And the first thing that really resonated with me, very stereotypically as a girl, is all of the research on body image, right? And the reason I feel the way I do about myself and my body and what's attractive, even when I was 5'9" and a size 3, I still felt like I was overweight and fat, right? And part of that was tied to these unrealistic standards that are in the media. And I'm not saying that the media makes you go out and feel terrible about yourself. There's all these other factors that go in, but the media does influence what you think is attractive and what you think is beautiful. And so that was the first thing that really sort of resonated with me. And I declared my comms major the next semester as soon as I had finished that course. I was like, this is cool, this is what I want to do, right? And now I can't at all separate my identity from my discipline. And maybe in media it's a little less hard to do, or a little harder to do that because we're so surrounded and engrossed with media and have it with us all the time in our pockets. But, I can't really imagine what my life would be without media or without my discipline. I teach and I research in media and communications. I also watch for fun media, right? I watch very terrible television sometimes, like Pretty Little Liars. So, and I also watch very good TV sometimes, like Game of Thrones. And so it's part of what I do not only for work, but it's something that I do for fun too. It's something that I enjoy, right? I like watching TV, and I'm okay with that. I don't feel bad about it. I watch less TV now that I have a kid. But my dissertation topic came also from my personal experience. So when I got married, I really, really wanted Christian Louboutin shoes to get married in, right? Seems totally materialistic now. And as a broke grad student, also paying for part of my wedding seems ridiculously exorbitant to pay for shoes that are that expensive. If you don't know what Christian Louboutin shoes are, they're very expensive designer shoes that are very uncomfortable. Why did I want the Christian Louboutin shoes? It's not because I had ever seen anybody in my real life wear Christian Louboutin shoes. I was in grad school and most of us were broke. And so I had never actually seen Christian Louboutin shoes in person. Why did I want them and why did I think I needed these amazing shoes for my wedding that I would probably never wear again and probably end up in flip-flops halfway through the night? And the reason I personally wanted them is because I saw them on every red carpet the year before, and I saw them on every late night talk show, and I saw the red soles, and I was like, those shoes are amazing, and I just wanted them, right? So that sort of tied into my dissertation topic where I looked at shows that portray wealthy, extremely wealthy young people, so things like Gossip Girl, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, shows like that, and how that could potentially influence people who watch them. Does it make you more materialistic? Is it that people are more materialistic that actually want to seek out shows like this, right? And so my own personal experience with media led to my dissertation topic. Related to my dissertation, I would never be where I am today without it, right? I wouldn't have ever finished my PhD without it. And in fact, I probably would have never finished writing my dissertation if it wasn't for media on top of this, because I would watch the Dan Patrick Show every day for 3 hours and write my dissertation. And I truly believe that if I didn't sit down and watch the Dan Patrick Show every day while I was doing my data analysis and my writing, I would have never finished my dissertation, and I would never be here. So for me, media is like very inherently tied to who I am and what I became and my discipline and my background. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I can't imagine a world for me personally without media being so connected to sort of every aspect of my life and my identity. And I challenge you guys to think about how media influences your own personal perceptions, beliefs, identities, stereotypes you may have about people, and all of that. A lot of those ideas, especially if we don't have personal connections with them or have never experienced them, a lot of that can potentially come from the media, or at least be influenced by the media, right, what we see. Do you want to click? So here are some things that I'm interested in, and also some things I've done research on that are sort of tied to this. How is new media and media use part of your identity, right? So think about that. Think about your day-to-day use with media and your engagement with media, and how does that form who you are? How can media shape your perceptions of yourself and others? Something else to think about. What processes are involved in why and how media affects who we are, right? Not everybody is affected the same way, and usually with media effects and all this kind of research, it's people who are vulnerable in some way, right? So just throw it out there with my thing, right? My mom was like a chronic dieter growing up, right? And was always concerned about her body. And so that was probably something that I saw growing up, combined with media and what I saw in standards of beauty. And then that also made me think that I wasn't skinny enough when I was 5'9" and, a size 3, right? So think about that. Why is it that certain people are affected by this and others aren't? Because not everybody is affected the same way. With the prevalence of smartphones, are we less or more disconnected from reality? Think about that, right? I'm guilty of it too. I walk and answer emails all day on campus when I'm going from point A to point B. What are you missing out on by just being on your phone, right, instead of connecting with people? If you say hi to somebody now that's a stranger, they give you a funny look like there's something wrong with you, right? Or if you're sitting at a doctor's office, everybody's on their phone, right? Nobody ever just talks to the person next to them, or on an airplane or something like that, right? So think about how that sort of changes. It's changing the way we sort of interact with each other. Does media use make us feel worse or better about ourselves? And there's tons of research on this that, really some media makes us feel good, and some media doesn't make us feel so good after we watch it, right? So there's some research that people watch things like Keeping Up with the Kardashians or reality TV shows where things are train wrecks because it actually makes them feel better about their own families and relationships, right? So there's some people that watch for that reason. So think about why you're watching certain things or why you're engaging with certain media and how it could potentially be making you feel worse or better afterwards, right? Do you feel like you have to skip eating pizza after you read a fashion magazine? Maybe, maybe not, right? Or, after you watch a sad movie, does it make you feel sad afterwards or does it make you feel happy, right? So think about how you're engaging with media and how it affects your day-to-day life. That's great.
I offer a perspective from political science, but it's just a perspective from political science. As I'm sure the others here would agree, within each of our disciplines, there are lots of different ways to address questions, such as the question of identity. Cynthia Boaz, for example, is also in political science and an FY faculty. There she is. And I'm sure if she were to give this presentation, she would highlight different things as well. Another opening thing I want to say is that not all of political science particularly cares about identity. I mean, there's definitely a lot that does, but there are aspects of political science that is interested in sort of, I was going to say bigger questions, that's not fair, but about bigger, what we would call units of analysis, instead of the individual. So just to state that up front. There is a part of political science that's literally called identity politics. And the idea behind identity politics is that individuals, or you as an individual, would organize with other people on the basis of something like ethnicity or sexual orientation. So you would organize with other people like that to affect change in government, or as we would say, to get resources from government. So from identity politics perspective, you're really part of a group that then tries to sway government one way or the other. But as I said, identity politics is just one aspect of our field. What I want to talk about today actually is related to what happens in the first, well, let's see, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, and that's election day. So I want to talk about voting. I'm not sure what just happened. When surveys are done to ask people why they voted, so, very commonly people say they voted because they have something to gain or they have something to lose. Sometimes they say they voted because they're particularly enthusiastic about a candidate or a particular issue. But actually the most common reason people give for why they vote is that they feel like it's their civic duty. I know this from research, but I also know this from personal experience. Off and on for years, I was an elections clerk. So I was at a polling station and I helped set it up, help run it. And I would see the voters come in, sign what they had to sign, and then go to the voting booth, vote. At the end of the whole process, some of you will learn this in November, after they've dropped their little envelope into the box to vote, we offer them a sticker that says, "I voted." And 99.5% of the time, I noticed people were glad to get that sticker. It was usually grumpy old men, and there weren't many of them. I mean, there were many grumpy old men who took the sticker, but just a few who didn't. And they had smiles on their faces, because it was as if they were expressing their civic duty. In between now and November, if you haven't, you may register for a political party. And that choice can affect your identity. After you register, whatever you register as, you might feel more patriotic. You might now all of a sudden identify yourself as an active participant in American democracy. Not just an observer or some high school student who's too young to be able to take part, but now you can actively be involved. The picture on the left, there's someone who not only is he holding the flag, but he's sort of wearing a flag, and in some ways he is a flag. Now I'm not saying that's how you're going to feel after you vote for the first time, but who knows. Voting can also feel empowering. So this is another way it can affect your identity. You can feel like you're an agent for change. And this is especially true in a state like California, where we have what is called direct democracy. In November, you are going to get to decide who to vote for president, for senator, and some other things. But for California, you're going to get to decide on all kinds of issues relevant to California. And it's not our representatives in Sacramento. You're not necessarily voting for them. You directly are going to have a say on these policy issues. And I'll just give you 3 of the propositions that are on the ballot for November. One of them, actually 2 of them, deal with the death penalty. So between now and November 8th, you're going to learn, hopefully, about what these ballot propositions are, what they mean for the death penalty. Should we keep it? Should we get rid of it? Should we change the rules about it? You will get to decide that. Another proposition deals with the legalization of marijuana. Okay, you will get to decide whether California allows what they often call as recreational marijuana. And there are also some less important things on the ballot for you to decide. For example, you'll get to decide whether see, this is one of those double negatives. Whether we should ban stores from not having bags. So Sonoma County, you can't get these plastic bags anymore. And some other counties do this as well. So you will get to decide whether stores can offer these again or not. If you haven't registered to vote and you do, this could affect your identity in other ways. Some people may ask you, why did you register as that? You're going to have to justify your decision. If some of you go home on the weekend, or you're just waiting, you're going to go back at Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving's after the election, you may have to justify your choice to your parents. Or more clearly, or more sooner, you may have to describe why you picked that candidate to a girlfriend or boyfriend who doesn't like your choice. Your party choice can also affect your social groups. Will your circle of friends include people from other political parties? If not, what does this say about you? You know, what if you find over time after the election, a couple of months later, that you're mostly hanging around with other Republicans, or you're hanging around mostly with other Democrats? You know, what does that say about your identity? What does it say about theirs? Voting can also affect you for years to come. I mean, I think if you voted one way or the other on that bag issue, I don't know. But if you voted for someone who became president, and then that person turned out to be a really bad president, that's going to be with you for, well, your whole life. Just to give you an example. Another aspect of identity in voting actually has to do with the identity of the non-voters. Okay? In some ways, non-voters might be perceived as outsiders. If you think of social relations as in-group, out-group, the in-group could be the voters and the out-group be the non-voters. However, another way of thinking about identity with non-voters is that the non-voter might be a principled opponent of a corrupt system. That maybe the democracy we have and the candidates that we have, it's all rigged or corrupt, and you don't want to be a part of it. So that is part of your identity. You may not be seen as lazy and unpatriotic, but as someone who doesn't think that the system works, and so participating in it doesn't matter. In FYE, we've been asking you who you are, to think about who you are, and I can tell you definitively that you are young citizens, and you're the type of person actually who is not likely to vote. And here's some data to demonstrate my point. So from 1964 up until the last presidential election, you're the bottom line. You're like the worst voters in the country. Until, of course, you get older. The last point I want to make about voting and identity actually has to do with political scientists like myself. As a political analyst, I try to prevent my own political desires and biases from interfering in a clear-headed interpretation of what's actually going on. But having a clear-headed understanding may be impossible. After all, even political scientists don't have on-off switches for our biases. And after all, as you've learned, we are not so smart. We suffer from logical fallacies, cognitive biases, and so on. But as McRaney would say from this book, if we can recognize them, we can at least try to manage them. So here are some of the questions I think would be interesting for you to think about, not just for FYE, but for the election as well. If you voted for Trump or Clinton, or you voted to support, to keep the death penalty, what led you to vote that way? Or if you decided not to vote, why didn't you vote? When you do vote, maybe it'll feel like a chore, you really weren't into it. Or maybe you will have that patriotic feeling. You'll be glad to get that sticker that says I voted. Of course, it may be different. You might vote by mail. Increasingly, people are voting by mail so that you won't have that sort of experience with other people. Will you think differently about people from the same party? Okay, so if you become a Democrat, for example, will you think about other people differently knowing that they're Democrats or Republicans or Greens or Independent or nothing? How will their impressions of your identity be affected by your party choice? Okay, so maybe, let's say you came from a conservative background, but you decided to go with the Democrats this year. How are people going to perceive you? And as you learn about the issues and the various candidates, and there are a lot, I mean, this is a historic election in November, how will you learn about these and avoid bias? In that respect, it's a nice connection to a talk about media studies. What news sources are you going to use? And why are you using them? And what messages are they sending to you to affect your approach to voting? I just picked confirmation bias because it's a really common one when it comes to news and trying to learn about candidates and issues. Okay? One last thing. Actually, I have one last thing.
And go to the polling place. Get the sticker. It's like, I mean.
There you go. So you're going to have literally the same part. They're going to get. Because to see what's on the screen, I may click saying, sure.
Hello. Okay, I need to do a little bit of work here. Oh, no. Before I start, I have can you get, that's pretty loud, isn't it? Wow. Scientific survey. How many of you are familiar with the song Let It Go from Frozen? Sweet. Hit it, Bob. Prove it. I have to stay here next to my music, sorry. Ready? Ready? Sing out, you're being graded on this. Okay, this intro really is really hard. Da 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 da. You know what? Da 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 da. Ready? The snow. Wow. Hey, we're not done. We're not done. Wait, wait, wait. You guys done? Are you guys done? What is it? What? Oh, we need to move the words. Where are we? Okay, here we go. Hang on. Hang on. Almost there. Almost there. Here we go. It's time to. Release through the air into the ground. My soul is spiraling in foam. Just like an Awesome. Give yourselves a hand. The cold ever bother you anyway? I swear there was a method to that madness. Thank you all for participating. I've never done that before. What did we just do? What did we just do? We sang. I would say we just participated in a moment of common culture centered around art and literature, right? And the movie Frozen is a pretty iconic movie right now. How many of you are Harry Potter fans? A lot of you. Frozen is, to me, to somebody who looks at these kind of things, almost rises to that level of iconic, culturally iconic texts that really have influenced a lot of people. It's almost a cultural touchstone. I had the good fortune to be at Disney World 2 Halloweens in a row after Frozen came out, so I got to see lots of little kids running around. I was there for meetings myself, but in costumes and stuff. Half of the kids were wearing Frozen costumes, were either Anna or Elsa, and 9 out of 10 of the kids were Elsa. Right? How many? Were any of you Elsa? My son went to his 5th kindergarten parade as Elsa. Okay? Yeah, I wish I had a picture. I would go as Anna. Elsa's story has this incredible power, right? It is a story of the misunderstood girl who has these mysterious powers that seem so threatening to her conventional culture, and she escapes and she declares her independence, builds her ice palace on her own, and has this moment of tremendous liberation by doing that, by claiming her identity, right? I've heard that Frozen, I've heard from many sources, a lot of people actually, for sexual minority people, for gender minority people, gender atypical people, Frozen has a lot of meaning. Can you see Whitewood? If maybe you're not there.
the themes capture the experience of people who want to break out and embrace their identity, right? I wonder how many of you sitting here in this auditorium for the first, being away from home for the first time, claiming a new identity, I wonder how many for you singing that song was a powerful moment. I hope it was for some of you. I totally know what it's like to be really profoundly moved and have my life really profoundly affected by a story. Only for me, it wasn't Frozen. Go ahead, Bob. I had a really privileged childhood. This is going to get serious in a second, okay? I had a really privileged childhood. I lived in a very comfortable home with two parents who loved me and took care of my two brothers and me, and everything was great until I turned 9. Then my mother got cancer, and she died when I was 11. And that was between my 5th and 6th grade years, and then in 7th and 8th grade, I went to a middle school that had a really serious bullying problem. I don't know how many of you enjoyed your middle school years. My 2 middle school years were the worst years of my life. I had formerly loved, school, and then school became a place of terror for me. So by the time I was about 14 or 15, I was kind of like a shadow of the person that I had, the kid that I had been. And then I read The Lord of the Rings. Okay? Everything changed after that. How many of you know this story? Just out of curiosity? Okay. Good. I see lots of problems with that story kind of later on in my life, but at the time it gave me a vision, a pattern for how to live my life. A vision of a world where I could be a hero of the story of my life, essentially. And especially because of this character right here, I started to see a vision or an idea for what my life could be like in a very much more practical sense. I loved the Gandalf character. And knowing myself, I was never going to be like an Aragorn, like a hero, an action hero kind of person. I wasn't going to be a savior like Frodo, but wow, this awesome other possibility of this wise person who serves the secret fire, who knows the deeper truths, who has read the old lore. Yeah, that could be me. The rest of the story of my life is basically that. I went away to college. I went away to college for 12 years. I got my PhD and MA, and I became what I think of as a wizard. In a sense. Isn't that okay, so we're talking archetypally, right? The pattern of living that stories embody. I wanted that kind of secret wisdom, right? Here I am, a college professor. It took me a little while to find my way to the English department at Humboldt State, which was my BA and MA alma mater. But I was a maniacally devoted English major when I got there. So I started with the simple tool of loving to read, and then and with one urgent question. Go ahead, Bob, give me the questions. And I know we're almost out of time. I'll just take one more minute. Stories seem to help us create identities. It certainly worked for me. How does that work? So the first thing that I did was I became a literature major, and I just read tons and tons of stories. I read Shakespeare, I read Chaucer, I read Jane Austen, I read all these stories, and I immersed in them, and I developed new identities from them, and I saw how other people could develop identities from stories as well. Second, then my thinking got kind of deeper, and I thought, well, what about the universe of stories? Every single human culture is based on stories in many ways. How do they work? How do they reflect the structure of society and the identity of the whole world, right? Then, by the time I got to the doctorate level, I had gotten even more kind of generalized, and I started thinking about language. Well, stories are built out of language, right? And so then my question became this one. Ultimately, stories are made of language. How does that work? How does language work? How does language affect us and shape us? And then, so through that, I joined a field called rhetoric. I moved from literature to a field called rhetoric, which is the 2,500-year tradition that talks about how language works as magic spells to change the world that we live in, to change opinions, to create the world that we live in. That's my story. So English, too, is all about identity. Thank you.